Now, Western Cape Premier Alan Winde says that he hopes to work constructively with the opposition to ensure that they can do all they can to do justice as representatives of the people in the provincial legislature. Winde was previously the MEC for Community Safety in the Western Cape, and he's no stranger to the challenges faced by the provincial government, which include, among others, key issues such as drug and violence on the Cape Flats. Premier Alan Winde joins us now from our Sea Point studios to discuss his vision for the province. Alan Winde, thanks so much for speaking to us here on Morning Live today.
Good morning, great, thank you. Good to be with you.
So one of the things you say is that the Western Cape is the best run province in South Africa, but you do believe that perhaps your communication isn't all that it can be. So what do you believe should be communicated that perhaps you haven't been able to do as effectively?
Well, I think that there's no doubt all the measurements show that we do have the best systems, the best team. We have delivered as far as all of our measurements are concerned, way better than any other province. So whether it's audit outcomes, whether it's unemployment rates, whether it's education and health outcomes, you see all of those, you see really, really good results. But of course, there's, that's what we know when we're in government. When you go out on the ground, you see that a lot of people don't actually know what we do as a government, what we have done. So really, we need to communicate more of what we are busy doing. And I think now, coming into a new term, we've got to take our manifesto, land it in government, and then make sure that what we are doing, we're communicating. And it's not only necessarily out of the legislature and parliament where you're answering questions or having the oversight role. It's also about just the general public knowing what you're doing. And I think also being open to the public so that they can also interact with you, that there's a much better and stronger relationship between government and the public who receive the services from us.
Now, Alan Winde, I'm looking at, for example, News 24 this morning, where the Western Cape has been flagged as the child murder capital of the country. And this despite, of course, the Western Cape being the only province with a Community Safety Act, and yet it remains one of the most crime-ridden areas in the country. How would you rate, the efforts that you've put in place as a government in that province to actually eradicate and try to make inroads into this crime situation?
So, I mean, as you say, we're the only province in South Africa that have passed legislation around how community safety should be operated. But community safety within our constitutional framework in a provincial level is actually not a very big role. Our job is really supposedly oversight. Now, that can't be acceptable if we've got the kind of numbers that we've got. I mean, we've just had a horrendous weekend where so many young people have lost their lives due to gang violence. Our murder rate is a very, very high murder rate. And so that's part of what I have been really driving and pushing in the last couple of months is how do we get more control from a management point of view around security, safety. And of course, the criminal justice system is a very, it's not an easy, quick fix system. It's a very involved system. So you've got policing on the one side, you've got your courts and the processes there, you've got your prisons and your mechanism for actually rehabilitating people. But we don't have any say in the province. We only have oversight. We don't have any management role in the province. We only have oversight. So the legislation is a step forward to try and find a way in which we can exercise our oversight in an even stronger way. We've put mechanisms in place, which we call court watching briefs. So we take key cases, prominent cases, or cases that we know really need to be watched. We put people in the court processes, making sure that the ball doesn't get dropped or finding out why a case doesn't go all the way through. We only have 3% conviction rate on arrests of gangsters. So we really have some very serious issues. So we've played within that space of our oversight role. We then table that document in the legislature for oversight. We can then tell you why and what the biggest reasons are that cases don't actually end up with convictions. We know that, primarily you'll see that investigations perhaps aren't completed properly, or the dockets don't arrive at court on time, or the dockets are incomplete. So we are starting to really monitor that very, very closely. But I actually think in provinces, our constitution, when it was put together right in the early days, we had in South Africa almost a war zone in KwaZulu-Natal. And, the fathers of the Constitution putting it together realized that if we actually gave policing powers and an election to one of the factions warring in KZN, that would be disastrous. So I support that idea, that we actually remove the power from provinces and took it to a national level. But I think we've moved on now, 25 years on. We need to have management of our policing closer to where the crimes are. So that is what I will continue to advocate. We need to re-look at our criminal justice system in toto, about our policing and how we manage policing. We have 4,500 policemen and women, too few in this province. We've got an intergovernmental dispute, so we really are pushing the boundaries from an oversight role. But I actually think we need more management. But at the same time, how do we support municipalities to build up municipal policing, because we have to make it safer. My number one real driver is jobs. We've got to get more and more people into jobs. We want to have one job at least in every household, but it's crime that's holding it back at the moment.
And
so how do we make it a safer place?
We'll come back to the job situation in just a moment, but I want to know from you, and what you're saying is absolutely plausible. However, what exactly are you going to take responsibility for? Because you were previously the MEC for community safety, gang violence, the drugs problems, specifically on the Cape Flats. These are very serious issues, and your predecessor even contemplated bringing in the army to try and deal with these situations. But how would you rate your role thus far, and how would you say this plan is working? The legislation you are talking about, is it effective? Because some would argue that it actually is not.
So the legislation, remember, is an oversight legislation. It's not a management legislation. So it's how we strengthen our oversight role to really dig into what is not happening or what is happening and why things are not being dealt with. So that oversight role picks up that we've got too few policemen and women. So we would do things to try and alleviate the problem. I put money on the table to say, why don't we give the money to the national minister to say, here's the money for reservists. So reservists give a certain amount of free time, and then they get paid an overtime stipend. I will pay that if that makes it easy. They've never been taken up. We actually go into police stations now with volunteers from our provincial government to go and do administrative work, to go and stamp affidavit forms, to take the oath for people who are coming in to get documents sorted out, so that we relieve men and women in blue, so that we actually relieve pressure so people can go out there and do the crime fighting that they're supposed to do. So at provinces level, and even if you look at it from a budgetary point of view, our budget is very, very small in a province because we don't get paid the money through the fiscus or from taxpayers' money in our division of revenue to fight crime. We get an oversight role. That money gets paid through the national departments. So, you've got billions of rands going into policing, and we are saying that money is not landing on the ground in the provinces where it is hurting most. And it's not as if the Western Cape is unique in this. We might have some very high crime numbers when it comes to gangsterism. Our murder numbers are very high, but they're also high in other provinces as well. So what I will also be doing in this position is speaking to the premiers of other provinces to say, is the system working for you? Because in my mind, it's not. Crime in South Africa is a very, very big issue, and we need to be dealing with as a country. And so I will be convincing other premiers to join me in putting pressure on the system, because surely it's the interest of our country that we make this a safe place. But in this province, I will continue to drive it as hard as possible, and finding whatever mechanism possible to try and change this almost runaway criminality that we've got, that really is destroying people's lives. It is putting so much pressure on the system, makes people want to just pack up and leave. It damages business confidence. It really, really does put pressure on society, and we have to change that, because that is one of those core fundamentals that a state owes its citizens.
And it certainly is a serious problem. 14 people were killed in a 24-hour period last week in gang violence. Surely this is an emergency situation that requires urgent attention. And as you say, people want to pack up and leave. What are you going to do? What are you going to say to them to convince them to stay?
So that's why we have to put this plan together to make this a safer province. And so that's why I'll do whatever necessary. We've got this small mandate with a small budget. We've got to change those. We are taking at local government level more and more taxpayers' money and ratepayers' money away from what we'd normally have to do with regards to potholes and roads and refuse removal and sewerage, etc. We're starting to take more and more money, you'll see, at local government levels to actually deal with crime fighting. At a provincial level, we're starting to budget more, almost go beyond our mandate, because we don't have that mandate of policing. But what do we do in the province in the meantime? But I think the real fight is to get the commitment and change in management of policing and move it down or devolve it down to provincial level, where you're actually closer to the crime, making the decisions at that level, making sure you're getting the resources at that level, and making sure that across government, whether it's local government, provincial government or national government, that there's an absolute commitment to making this country safer. And so I will continue to drive that. It is, I think, the biggest inhibitor to everything. It inhibits education, it inhibits healthcare, it inhibits everything that we do in our lives at the moment in our country and in this region. I keep on saying that there are children in parts of this province who do homework underneath the table because it's much safer than sitting at the table. We've got ambulances who have to go past a police station to get an escort before you can go and fetch someone who's in desperate need of medical help. And that is because they'd be going into a red crime hotspot zone. We really have to look at crime differently, at policing, and then of course the rest of the criminal justice system. But I myself am focusing on the policing first. And then again, at the other side of the spectrum, I think as South Africans, we've got to start looking at values and a value set. Because, it's all very well tackling the big issues, tackling the murder rate. In this province, in the last 6 months, 1,875 people murdered. You mentioned the 14 young people murdered due to gang violence in the Cape Flats this weekend. On average, we lose 10 people to murder in our province every single day. This is out of control. It would be declared a war zone if it was by the United Nations. And so we really need to take this seriously. I keep on saying that to the national minister. I see we've got the same minister again. He and I were having some really big fights in the lead up to the 8th of May. I've said to him that I'll put up a little white flag. I will be seeing him later this week at the Cabinet Lekgotla, and saying to him, we need to do things differently. I'm prepared to start again, but I haven't withdrawn the intergovernmental dispute. We are disputing the way that policing and the needs of the people are being addressed. And it's not only us as government. We see the Social Justice Coalition took the minister to court because of areas in our region that are under-resourced, and they won the court case. And so we need to get that resourcing right. We need to get the management right, because really it's about putting a proper management system in place and a plan in place to say this will become a safer place, and this is what we'll do today and tomorrow and the next day in order to achieve that.
Now, one of the other issues bedeviling your province is the levels of inequality, and of course it's pervasive throughout the country, but when it comes to the Western Cape in particular, it is said to be some of the highest that there has been in 10 years, and your government often gets criticized for not having the appetite to actually change the status quo. It is said that you are more in tune with what's happening in the more opulent, the more affluent areas of Cape Town, and not really caring too much about what happens in the lesser areas where the poorer people actually live. How do you respond to that, and what are you going to do about these levels of inequality?
So, of course, you always hear that rhetoric. The best is to go and have a look at the Gini coefficient measurements across cities in this country, and you'll see that Cape Town is not the most unequal, or the way the Gini coefficient measures. But that's beside the point. At the end of the day, we have definitely very poor and very rich, and we've got to make sure that we change that. And that is why I think the biggest focus should be on jobs. We've just come through an election campaign where you go across the province. I've been to every single town, every single municipality. I've been into spaces where there's been the worst poverty you've ever seen. So absolutely, and that's why I think we've said in this campaign, we at least need to find one job in every household. You put a job into a poor household, you change that household. And so what is it that we need to be doing to really get this economy going? We've got the highest youth unemployment rate in the world in South Africa. We've got some of the highest unemployment rates in the world in South Africa. Obviously, those are big drivers of those unemployment rates on national policies. But I always say that you can have two towns next door to each other. One town can be prosperous and the next one not. That comes from leadership. That comes from doing things differently. I know we're not going to have more money as a province because our taxation income as South Africa and our economic growth, as we've just seen, reduced again. We don't have the economic growth, but the taxation income that we do have, we have to start using it much wiser, much smarter. And everything we do is how do we enable the economy so that we can actually put jobs in households, because a job in a household changes that household, and we will then change this ecosystem and this Gini coefficient. And so that's why we need to make it safer. That's why we need transport systems to work. So the people who are the poorest of the poor live the furthest away. So what happens is you go and have a look at the train system and it's broken. And who runs the train system? So again, there's another space that we're saying, how do we devolve that management? And there I do know that I have a partner in Gauteng. The Premier in Gauteng has also been saying the same thing. We need to manage the trains on a regional level, devolve the management down, and that's exactly what we're saying here. So the Gauteng and the Western Cape, the same thing. You will go to Mitchell's Plain, 1.3 million people live there, and you will see a train station that's actually a very nice train station, but there are no trains in the station. And so we've had trains that have been destroyed, lack of investment, and the most important for me is management again, is how those trains manage. They need to be safe, on time, efficient, and as soon as they work properly, you then start to get people to move towards public transport, because then we can integrate trains, taxis, and buses, and that really get that public transport system working. That works in other cities around the world. It's not as if it's rocket science, it's about management.
You do
so that's the ecosystem.
You do say,
Sorry?
Alan Winde, that the poorest people live furthest, from the job opportunities from the city. And property prices, many have said, is what is keeping people, poor people living on the outskirts of the city of Cape Town, out of these affluent areas. The Western Cape government has been accused over and over again of gentrification. How are you planning to build a government that is more inclusive, a city that is more inclusive and gives everybody an opportunity to move closer to and even live within the city?
So I think there are two sides there. Absolutely. We need to try and create a space, and we've been asking for military land. District 6 is an absolute disaster. 25 years on, and we still haven't managed to get District 6 sorted out. Of course, there we don't have the levers again. Transfer that property to us, and we'll show you what we can do with it. But we will do the same thing with our own properties. We've got what we call the better living model. It's a design that we've come up with where you've got work, live, play, where government incentivizes so you can actually have access for people with lower LSM levels that get access into the space. We've got the pilot project with over 3,000 units that will be supported by government, funded by government, but in a space where you create that work-live environment. That's the first pilot. I think there's a couple of large areas around the city that can happen with. That's the first thing. But the second thing is also, how do we get everybody can't come and live in a 25 or 27 square kilometer space or hectare space? How do we also broaden the economic opportunities? And so that's that better living model. Looking also at other areas like the Twin Rivers Urban Park, the outer areas of it. Obviously, the center of it is a floodplain. We need to have a look at that. There are some private sector opportunities, but how does government join in so that we create that access? But also in creating that access, it's also about creating opportunities. And with the fourth industrial revolution, how things have changed, and you see how the centers are moving. So it's not always about the center of the city of Cape Town or George or the other municipalities, Saldanha Bay. It's how we also create those environments and opportunities for investment. And not only, government's got to play a role, but I think this is where we need business confidence in the private sector. And so if you want to go to one of the most modern call centers, and we've got lots of call center jobs in this region, you don't have to go to the middle of the city of Cape Town, you have to go to Delft. And you'll go and see a call center operation in Delft that, I think it's the most modern one in the Southern Hemisphere. And so it's about a balance of the two. And then, of course, it's about property prices. And I would, obviously we've got to try and find that balance. You don't want to over increase or allow the property prices to over increase, but you also don't want to be too much involved in managing that component. You need private sector and private enterprise to do what they do. And every property owner would like to see their investment growing in value. There are parts of our country that you can go to today that your property will be worth less next year than it is this year. You don't want to be in that environment. But it's about creating the balance between the two.
So what's your response to the plight of the people in the Boer Kaap?
Okay, so the Boer Kaap, of course, these are the difficult conundrums. I've been saying to a lot of people that they've been asking for this heritage overlay. And of course, if we can find the economy to work within the heritage overlay, which I think is already starting, so there are huge assets in preserving the heritage. But of course, heritage overlays are restricting rights. And rights also come at a cost, or restrictive of rights have come at a cost. And these are the difficult balances that you've got to find as well, because everybody wants to see a value of a space increasing and not decreasing. But of course, if you don't have a job, you then have a big problem about saying, well, I can't afford to pay perhaps increasing rates and taxes. And so it's about making sure that we get the balance of the economic growth, understanding that when you put a heritage overlay, that it does have costs, it does have economic costs, and how can you find value within those economic costs to create sustainability? Because, of course, we don't want to allow places to degenerate.
Yeah, but that's exactly the type of gentrification. That's exactly the type of gentrification that your government is being accused of, that you are squeezing people out of the more affluent areas, the better areas of Cape Town by pushing up the rates of property in the city.
Well, the rates of property determined by the value of the property. And, we've just had a last round of valuations where everybody's valuations went up. But if you look at the rate in the rand, the rates actually came down. Because, of course, now you've got higher value properties, the rate in the rand comes down because you don't need to take that same percentage off to get the same amount of money. We need to have property values going up, but of course you can't have them going up too fast. And that, I think, also the market economy sorts itself out. So you would have seen that as the slowdown in property sales, which is happening right now, you will also see a change in those property prices. But that's called the free market. If government gets too involved in that market, we start getting the opposite happening. And I would venture to say that that's what's been happening in South Africa. And in South Africa, we are getting poorer as a nation, and that is because of government policies. And those government policies are the opposite.
Well, we're going to have to leave it there. Thanks so much, Alan Winde, new Premier of the Western Cape, chatting to us about his vision for the province and also reflecting on some of the problems that they are facing.